Welcome to It's Meaningless. Meaningless. This is the podcast for entrepreneurs within the first 5 years of business who are tired of stuck and are ready to stomach the brutal truth. Here we uncover the meaningless daily habits that keep you from protecting and growing in life and in business. This is episode 14. Why we obsess about security. And if you don't believe you do, so we talked about we went through the psychology of security in a previous episode, and frankly that was like really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of even just the conversation on the psychology of security, what it means, how it works. So we went through kind of a couple scenarios of what it takes to secure something. We went through the scenario about pretty much having a house, the different levels and layers of security needed to protect things in the house or things on the property. So things, what it takes to secure things in the yard, what it takes to secure things inside the house, and of course, like gate outside the property, security system, cameras, locks on the front doors and windows, safe on the inside. So in other words, the different layers of security it takes to get to something, and then coming to the place of realizing that just because you have all those things doesn't say, oh, it's secure. No, because even if you have all those things in place, you leave your safe combination lying around, and or have people that you you give or extend trust to that aren't trustworthy, then it defeats the purpose of all the efforts that you put in to try to secure things. So, and even still, like even if it's not somebody, even if it's somebody you don't trust, like that is someone you have not chosen to trust, then there's still ways to get through all of those layers anyway. So part of part of the and I guess I'll go into this a little bit. Part of that conversation is we don't part of what we don't understand in terms of psychology of security is just like there are levels and layers that we use to protect things, there are levels of what we would call secure. In other words, there is no such thing as, oh, this is secure as an absolute. Like nothing can get through this. This will always defend. Like it's that that never it exists. Like whether it's physical security, whether it's relationally, whether it's emotional, like there's no one size fits all. And if you think so, like I don't want you to be mistaken because that's not. I really don't want you to be mistaken. That's not a. That won't be comfortable. And I'm telling you from this from experience. It's I personally know what it's like to I guess build walls, call myself defending myself, protecting myself, emotionally, relationally, and coming to realize that that's not like the things I've built aren't adequate to one, they're not adequate to protect me in every situation, and that is they weren't as adequate as I thought they were. So that's the first thing. But in addition to them not being adequate to do what I was trying to do, which was protect, they also kept me from getting the things I wanted. And I think the last one, actually the first one's kind of the last one is definitely enough in itself. But then when you add the two together, then it comes into question like, why am I doing this? So part of the purpose of this episode is to at least broach the question as to why we we insist that with all the things necessary, with all the strategy, like the concerted thinking, like I want to say brainstorming and like directed brainstorming, not just scatterbrain. Oh, I got some idea. No, I mean like this layer of security. In other words, how the gate outside the house corresponds and relates to the locks on the doors, how that corresponds to the cameras. In other words, what's each one's purpose, and then how does that purpose kind of go hand in hand with the purposes of the other components of your security system. Um, so the the question is kind of why do we insist that we're experts at this? Um, and I do like I'm saying this from the perspective, like I said, for me, that I think we, and I definitely know me, we do seem to think that we are, I guess, because we get a little proof ahead of time that, um, or we just told ourselves, and eventually, I guess we get some proof that, okay, if I do this, this, and this, then it works. It's almost like when you're a kid and you pretend like you're invisible, and and I guess people stop looking at you, or people don't see you, or look at you, or acknowledge you. And I don't mean this like as an ongoing thing, but like in a closed situation. Like I know being invisible is a completely different thing that is ongoing. But in other words, you're playing around and trying to be invisible, and you pretend like you are. And when people don't look at you 2, 3 times, usually it's about 2 times, that becomes enough proof to say, oh, I must really be invisible. Uh, I say that partly to say is like it's interesting to see quickly, how easily we can convince ourselves of things. Um, in other words, from a scientific standpoint, um, we can get as little as 2 data points, and some people, oh god, like I mean, people are people, like people are different, but like some people will use one. And in fact, I say some people, but I say most of us, especially depending on the circumstance, the situation, the gravity, or the intensity of the data point. Sometimes we'll use one data point to decide, oh, well, this works or this doesn't. But a lot of times, like we'll take 2 instances, 2 examples, 2 scenarios, and say, oh, based on these 2 scenarios, then I can come to this conclusion. It's not. That's not science. Um, you need more than 2 data points to make a pattern. You need more than 3 data points to make a pattern. Um, like realistically, in other words, you're gonna base. Yeah, if you're gonna base the rest of your life on it. Um, so the question really is again, what the question we're talking about is why. Um, so I want to go into um, I want to go into a bit of a story of my own. Um, they kind of, well, I guess that highlights this a little bit. Um, because effectively the what we're after, what we're hoping for with this is to get to the point of realizing the goal here isn't to like in the end be hopeless that oh there's no way that I can possibly do this, but it is to be realistic of being able to accept and embrace that there's some things I can control and I can and I will make concerted effort to focus on those. And then there's other things that just can't be. So at the very least, we don't walk around with the delusion that somehow there's some magic bullet, there's some that magic formula that we can use to yeah, that there's a magic bullet or formula that we can use to really protect that is absolutely without any exceptions protect ourselves. um that delusion actually is what usually gets us um in the most trouble because that delusion tells us that it effectively puts us in situations that tells us it's safe when it's not. That is, it puts us in a mindset of believing that when we get into that, regardless of what situation we're in, that we're safe. So, which means that we'll walk into situations that aren't safe, that we probably could have perceived as not being safe, but have a false perception of safety there, which like no one wants to feel unsafe. At the same time, if we're in an unsafe environment, then it's good to feel that way because um, those are alerts. Those are alerts to let us know, okay, take some action, like reduce risk, evade, flee, do something. Um, which in itself is part of the security. And like, I guess part of it is like where you go into this thing of, um, I'll come back to that point. Um, so the effectively the story that I mentioned. So I when I was um about 8 years old, 9 years old, 8 years old, 8 years old, I think. Um, my family and I had just moved to a new house. Um, and this one night my parents and I, my family and I, had gone to PTC or parent teacher conference. Some people call it PTA, PT, whatever. I think they call it something else these days. But anyway, well, I don't think they have them these days. But the parent teacher conference, which is usually after school, so it was at night. And my mother actually was a teacher, so we um we were there pretty late. It was definitely dark after we left. So my siblings and I rode home with my mother. My mother again, my mother was a teacher. So we weren't in the same car with my dad has some things that he helped out with our church. So he wasn't really heading home right then. He was headed to go do some cleanup or lock up at the church. When he left, So we leave and we're headed home. Headed home, and we run out of gas. Run out of gas, and um, so thankfully we're kind of next to the small, um, uh, uh, yeah, pretty big mall in the area. So we were able to kind of coast and get in the parking lot instead of being out in the street. Like ironically, like there's a gas station right across the street. Unfortunately, like this is back in the day when like gas stations closed at night. So by this time it's closed. So we're trying to figure out what to do. It's this pre-cell phone. Uh, I'm sure some people had cell phones, but yeah, some people had. So let me see. Yeah, some people had cell phones. This is definitely back when like car phones were probably being used, actually being used. But again, like few people had car phones. Um, but so I guess the car phone was the equivalent of cell phone back then, which, like I said, very few people had. So this is pre-cell phone. Um, so we um we get to so we just sitting there in the parking lot, trying to figure out what to do, and this guy comes by, drives up, says, "Hey, how you doing?" All that kind of stuff. Uh, all I remember is like he drives off. Um, I guess he was going to get help or something or whatever, get some gas or get a gas can or something. He comes back a little later, and when he gets back, um, oh no, he's telling my mom to get out of the car. Um, telling my mom to get out of the car, and I remember him. He's not forceful because she didn't try to resist or anything. Um, but I remember him pretty much like pulling her, well, escorting her to his car and putting her in his passenger seat. Um, pretty much like a almost like a police move. Like she's not resisting or anything, but almost like a police move. Like push your head down, that kind of thing. Um, and like I'm there, like my siblings are there. Um, three of my siblings are there in the car, and um, yeah. So like, I mean, if you're tracking with this, like you probably already feel a lot of the the emotions, like probably taken aback a little of like the gravity of the situation. And one of the things I took, I'll say one of the things I took from that moment was that it was for me because ultimately like um it took about I don't know 5 or 10 minutes before the mall security came around. They found us, my siblings. Um, so they took us inside and um, pretty much took care of us um, till the police detective came to pick us up, and eventually, like we got connected with some family um, to keep us for the night. Um, but one of the things I took away from that situation was the idea that I need to be the one responsible for taking care of myself. Um, and again, that's kind of going back to the thing I talked about in terms of the one data point thing. Um, And mind you, like this is a fairly significant event. So the problem though with that conclusion is that like this event spoke loudly, and I used the fact that this event spoke very loudly as an excuse, or I mistook that. I used that as, I guess, proof in lieu of more data points, more examples, like letting the story play out. Um, I use that as a reason for validating my conclusion. And going back, like if I go back rationally, um, even that situation doesn't prove the conclusion I came to. And I'm not saying I shouldn't have come to that conclusion. I mean, I was 8 years old. Um, like I came to the one I came to, and frankly, that really brings us into like what this really is all about. I want to say what it's all about, as in, um, I'll call it what it's all about. Um, but before I jump there, I want to give you a little bit more context for why. Um, yeah, a little bit more context for why the result of this wasn't what it looked like. Why my um, conclusion wasn't correct. So, but before my brothers and I got out of the car, um, like we took some time right there with just to pray. Um, and it was pretty much right after that we got out of the car. Right after that, and that the security guard came around um, to find us and pick us up. Um, so like even though even though that was an unsafe situation that we were in, um, and my mother was definitely in an unsafe situation, which was not like it was not reassuring for us. Um, Still, like that night, even with my mother, like the way like she came out of that. She's still living today. Thank God got to see her at Thanksgiving. Um, even with what she experienced, like at the end of the day, we weren't in control of like securing ourselves. Like, could there have been other things that like we could have done to prepare? Yes, in that situation. But I want to go back actually more so to me because in that moment, like the point is, like I was 8. There wasn't much I was gonna do. But in my mind, fast forward to a month later, in my mind, I had made up, that is me and my siblings. Um, in my mind, we had made up this idea that okay, let's do all this stuff to prepare and get ready and make all this stuff to protect. And of course, like nothing like that ever happened again. But and I know sometimes it does to other people. Like just because it happens once doesn't mean it won't ever happen again. But let's just say odds are, if it happened once, like to that extent, that like the same situation doesn't happen again. Uh, but and again, like I know for some people it does, it has, and for that definitely, I can't say enough of like how much um much, at the very least, that I can empathize. Um, and how sorry I am to experience that. That is for you to have experienced that. Um, and at the same time, the 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 idea here is when we adopt the wrong when we adopt the wrong conclusions, no matter what the impetus was, what we're basing it off of, when we adopt the wrong conclusions about security, ultimately the result is that we close doors of opportunity. We literally close doors of opportunity. I'm going through this book called Trust, and I highly recommend it. I mean, great author anyway. Henry Cloud is the author, and like I've read a bunch of stuff, and I'd like to read a bunch more. Um, and pretty much like everything I've read from him has been great. But this book is called Trust, and effectively, one of the things it talks about in there is kind of the basis for which what it takes to actually choose to trust someone. Um, so the components of that, effectively, that there are components. In other words, just like we're talking about um, with security, that there are levels and components that of security. That there are levels and components of trust. And in fact, when we go down to it, like the two go hand in hand, um, probably hand in glove. Um, but the two go together. So this book is about effectively the fact that trust isn't like a light switch that you just turn on and off. It's it's component based. So in other words, we can trust in that is we can trust people, we can trust situations or whatever in for a specific purpose, for a specific reason, and to a specific degree, based on mainly based on like past experience. And part of what this book uncovers, and things that I've seen personally too, is the fact that trust is necessary to accomplish anything that you'll ever do. Like you have to trust somebody at some point. And in fact, I saw this picture. It's a YouTube short. Um, saw this YouTube short the other day. I may put it in the comments. That effectively, um, yeah, effectively, saw this YouTube short that effectively there's a cyclist on in a race, like a real life race, and his mechanic is like hanging out the window of this car that's riding alongside him to fix his gear shifter, uh, which it looks pretty awkward from the standpoint that the mechanic is like the bike mechanic is kind of hanging over the back of him. Um, well, yeah, behind him, kind of hanging over the back of the bike, um, while this guy's riding the bike. And like to me, that is the amount of trust that's necessary for everybody to make that happen is pretty big. That's a huge level of trust that it takes to do something like that. Because this mechanic is at like halfway out the window, like one wrong move and he's down the street, probably up under a tire. Um, the cyclist is like riding right next to the car. One wrong move from the mechanic who has his hand literally on him and is kind of working on his bike. Um, one wrong move from him or the driver, and the cyclist is toast. We don't realize like how much like we need to trust people. Like how critical trust is, yeah, how necessary it is for us to achieve any of the things that we want to achieve. Like we can try to sit on the sidelines and say, well, I'm just gonna sit and not do anything, but like most people know by now that's not living. That's not life, it's not living. And even then it's like it doesn't make you any less vulnerable. Um, It really doesn't. Um, so it's like you can be insecure and unproductive at the same time, or you can risk, that is, choose to trust people, um, and make progress towards the goals and achieve the goals that you want to achieve, even if you have setbacks along the way. And like part of this is like life, the way life was designed. Um, Part of this is life and the way life was designed. Um, there are certain situations where security seems to have been breached or things happen that we would have wanted to have been protected from. And there's things in my life, even the story I just gave you, there are things in my life that have happened that were like horrific, tragic in the time, that like looking back, I can say I'm thankful that those things happened. Not because of like, oh, I'm looking for some pain, but because in a lot of those situations, I can look back and say, this good thing came out of it that would not have come if I didn't go through that situation. And the good thing on the end brought uh, far more goodness into my life than um, far more value, far more benefit in my life than the bad thing that was the catalyst for it, which, uh, from my perspective, that's what we call investing. Now, um, that's what I call investing: buy low, sell high. In other words, take a risk, take a lose a little bit to gain more later. That's investing. Um, so, like, I think we can approach this topic with either, yeah, we can approach this topic with fear, which a lot of times we do. This is Fear is usually what leads us into obsessing and thinking that we are the ones who like control this topic of like, or we're the ones who control the security for ourselves. In other words, that we are adequate in ourselves to protect ourselves by simply just doing this thing right here. That's all we can do. This is our method, usually. Um, But there's life. Um, there's peace. And these days, like some people may be like, "Hey, I don't know anything about that these days," and I get it. Like, um, these days, like, there's no shortage of reasons to not be at peace. Um, and at the same time, like, life is better when we are to be able to accept. Okay, these parameters exist. These things exist. Like, if we really want to talk about being scientific, uh, these parameters exist. I have these particular inputs that I can use to influence. Um, and so knowing this, that is, knowing the inputs, knowing the existing parameters, how do we go? How do we go? It's like playing a video game. Um, like the map is what it is. The level is what it is, and the buttons or whatever that you have to manipulate the game um are what they are. So it's kind of up to you to like, how are you gonna try some stuff, see if it works. Okay, that doesn't work. Let's try something else. Um, so this part of it is getting to the place of realizing that life isn't as life isn't as static and sure as we like. It's supposed to be fluid. Like live, let live, breathe, let breathe, that kind of thing. Um, which doesn't feel so secure sometimes. And at the same time, it is it's life. It is what it is. Um, so yeah, my hope, and even as I'm saying this, like this is something that I'm coming to a fuller understanding of myself. Um, yeah, my hope is that you'll come to a place of being able to adopt um, and embrace a mindset of like understanding the fluidity of life, understanding the role you have in security and securing things. That is what you can do um, in terms of securing. Do what you can and continue to put concerted effort into pursuing the things that like are desires that you want to achieve instead of allowing like fear of insecurity, that is fear of not being secure, keep you from achieving things that will bring joy into your life. Um, I could go on for days. Um, like this topic is so broad, it's so vast, it's so and it's so important. Um, so that's all I have for this one. Take care. God bless you, and goodbye.